If it's Friday, a potentially major setback in the special counsel's criminal case against Donald Trump, as the Supreme Court rejects Jack Smith's plea to have it take up a dispute that he says is fundamental for his case and for American democracy. Plus, Israel faces renewed pressure from the U.S. and the international community to address the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, as the first American hostage is confirmed to have died while in Hamas custody. And President Biden is dispatching his Secretary of State and Chief of Homeland Security to Mexico in an attempt to regain control over mass migration at the southern border that has reignited a humanitarian and political emergency. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake in Washington, where we begin with a potentially major setback for the special counsel in the criminal case against former President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This afternoon, the Supreme Court declined special counsel Jack Smith's request to make an expedited ruling on a dispute that is central to his case, all but ensuring the trial's March 4th start date will be delayed. It comes as the former president is trying to delay the trial in the hopes that he might have the power and protections of the presidency before a verdict can be reached. And the powers of the presidency are precisely what is at issue in this dispute, as the former president is claiming that he has presidential immunity tied to his actions around the 2020 election and January 6th. In a filing to the Supreme Court earlier this month, special counsel Jack Smith said an immediate decision on this question was, quote, of imperative public importance, and starkly laid out what he says are the stakes in the case. He wrote, "This case presents a fundamental question at the heart of our democracy, whether a former president is absolutely immune from federal prosecution for crimes committed while in office, or is constitutionally protected from federal prosecution when he has not been impeached or has been impeached but not convicted, before the criminal proceedings began." With the Supreme Court denying Smith's appeal, the matter will go to the D.C. Court of Appeals on January 9th, with a potential Supreme Court ruling only coming much after that fact. Joining me now is NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian and NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos. So, Ken, Supreme Court making some news on a Friday before a holiday. What does this mean for Jack Smith's case? How long of a delay are we potentially talking about here?
We won't know that, Garrett, until we learn how quickly the Supreme Court takes up the case after the D.C. Court of Appeals rules. As you said, the D.C. Court of Appeals has scheduled oral arguments for January 9th. They have agreed to take this up on an expedited basis. So they could turn their ruling around in a couple of weeks, presumably. And then the question will be, does the Supreme Court also take it up on an expedited basis, recognizing the importance to the country? Or do they just take it up in the normal course of things? It's pretty clear. It's pretty likely that they will take it up because it presents a novel constitutional question, never been decided before. It's pretty likely to me that this Democrat-appointed appeals court in D.C., majority Democrats, is going to agree with the trial judge that presidential immunity doesn't apply here. And then the question will be, how quickly can the Supreme Court take this up? If they take their time, it could really delay this trial until after the November election, in which case everything is up in the air, Garrett.
Well, and I can't look at this without overlaying my political calendar on it and all those March 5th elections for Super Tuesday. So, Danny, are you surprised to see the court deny this motion? Jack Smith, tried in that filing to make a very compelling case that about not just the arguments here, but the nature of the timing.
Yes, and the defense's argument, we don't know how much it swayed the court because they only issued a one-line, I guess you would say, order denying certiorari before judgment. Mm-hmm. But the defense's argument was essentially this. Just because this is an important issue, and I recognize this is one of the most important issues in American criminal law or American law at all, whether or not a president is immune from conduct within the outer bounds of acting as a president, or, of course, whether what he did was way outside the boundaries of being the president anyway. But the defense pointed out that importance doesn't always require speed. And in fact, the defense argued that because this is such a weighty issue, the normal course of appeals is the proper avenue. Now, you take a step back, and probably never in the history of a criminal defense argument has the real purpose of the argument been so transparent, and it is this. What the defense could have said, but never would have said on paper, is we need delay, because if we delay this long enough, these federal cases go away. If they're still pending and Donald Trump is elected and inaugurated, he will simply appoint an attorney general to dismiss them, and barring that, he will simply try to pardon himself. But of course, they can't put that in their papers.
Right.
Instead, they have to make an argument for this wending its way through the ordinary appellate process.
Ken, to that point, and I hate to ask you to be inside the justices' heads here, but if to the degree they're trying to insulate themselves from politics here by saying we're going to do this the normal way, doesn't it also get more complicated the closer they get to Election Day? Like, how do the judges weigh the politics of one choice here versus that of another? They cannot possibly be looking at this purely in a vacuum.
Boy, I would love to ask them, Garrett. I'm sure you would, too.
Yeah,
I'd love a little more
We're trying to book them,
transparency
Ken, but they're not coming in.
Exactly. Yeah, and not even explaining this one-sentence order. So, again, I think we're going to learn a lot by how they act after this goes through the appeals court. And to Danny's point, it isn't just a matter of sort of regular order here. It's also, this is a case that's never been heard by any court except Judge Chutkan. And so it might help the justices to have a set of legal arguments made before the appeals court, case law cited, legal theories, and then they can chew on that while they're chewing on the oral arguments presented to them. It is I mean, the law kind of works like that. It builds upon itself, and so that's a kind of a on the merits reason why they would have wanted to delay. But you're right, the longer they delay, we reach a situation where by delaying, the Supreme Court is making a hugely monumental decision for our democracy, which is that Donald Trump doesn't end up facing trial on these very important charges before he faces the voters. And if that lays on the Supreme Court, that's going to be a really tough day for how Americans view the Supreme Court.
Danny, to Ken's point here about looking for case law, I mean, we're in uncharted territory here, and I know that, but how do you view the relative strengths and weaknesses of the defense's argument here about presidential immunity? Is there real merit to that argument, or is this purely about delaying this process as long as possible?
It's really hard to ballpark or handicap which way the Supreme Court will ultimately go, because this case will end up at the Supreme Court. But we've gotten a preview, at least at the district court level, and I think probably more likely than not, courts would weigh against granting a president this broad, a giant sort of bubble of immunity. We know that presidential immunity has existed since the Supreme Court of the Nixon era, but we've never fully known its contours. And that's what the court has done over the years, later on with Clinton and now with former President Trump. So there are limits to presidential immunity. We just don't know exactly what they are. So this very important issue of whether a president is absolutely immune for something done while he's in office. And then, of course, there's the added issue of whether what he did was acting as a campaigner or as a president. That's another very weighty issue that needs to be decided. And any of these could go either way. On these weighty, novel issues of law, each appellate court is likely not to give the lower court a lot of deference. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't go through the normal processes. Although I must say, I thought Jack Smith made a good argument for jumping the D.C. Court of Appeals, because looming over this entire case is what I talked about earlier, which is, folks, is it one of those things that we can't say out loud? If this case is delayed long enough, it goes away if Trump is elected. 2 federal cases go bye-bye into the wind if he's elected, and they are still pending.
And, Ken, to that point, I mean, Jack Smith made a pretty impassioned plea, or as impassioned as you could be in a legal argument, to try to pick this up as quickly as possible. Does he have any other tools at his disposal to prevent what Danny's describing from happening and try to force this case to happen before Election Day? Or is he totally at the mercy of these judges?
It's the latter. He's at the mercy of the pace of the judges and the court system. But there is a context here, Garrett, that I don't think we should forget, which is that Jack Smith was appointed in November 2022, nearly 2 years after the attack on January 6th. The Justice Department made some decisions early on not to aggressively pursue this case until after the January 6th committee put that evidence in front of the public and made it impossible for prosecutors not to go after this case. And, you know, some people need to answer for those decisions, because we would not be in this situation had the Justice Department aggressively moved forward and began investigating this case in the months right after the attack on the Capitol.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking if this case still hasn't gone to trial by this fall. Ken and Danny, stick around because we have more Trump investigation news to talk about. The Detroit News has new details now about a 2020 phone call that was recorded of then-President Trump pressuring two Republican election officials in Michigan not to certify the presidential election results in the state's largest county. The two election canvassers later tried to rescind their certification votes, but that effort was unsuccessful. The Detroit News reports that Trump said, quote, "We've got to fight for our country. We can't let these people take our country away from us." They also note that the recordings were made by someone present for the conversation, but obtained through an intermediary who was not present. NBC News has not heard or verified these recordings. Now, also on the call, RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, who told the officials that their legal fees would be covered if they did not certify the election. In a statement, the Trump campaign did not deny the call or any of its reported contents. So we bring in our legal ace team here. Ken, I'll go back to you here first. We know that Trump was calling local officials all around the country, including Michigan, after the 2020 election. What specific new information did we glean from this reporting that matters on a legal basis?
Of the ask here, I think, is what we're learning. And this is in some ways worse than Georgia, because remember, in Georgia, it was a margin of 11,000 votes. Joe Biden won Michigan by more than 150,000 votes. There were no credible allegations of fraud that would have changed that result. And this was a pro forma move by the Wayne County canvassers to certify what was obvious to everyone, the results of the election. And yet you had then President Trump and the chairwoman of the RNC calling up these Republican canvassers and trying to pressure them to stop this thing somehow. It fits right into the allegations that Jack Smith is making in this indictment, that this was an unlawful conspiracy to suppress, the democratic transfer of power.
Ken, do we have any idea if Jack Smith has this tape or if this is something that exists in evidence? Presumably it would not be that hard for him to get it now that they know it exists.
Well, they're certainly going to get it now. I don't know the answer to whether they had it before, but, I tend to err on the side. This is a pretty massive FBI investigation, and they're uncovering, turning over a lot of rocks, and they may well have had it, Gary.
Danny, how do you see this fitting into the Trump probes here? I mean, it's nothing sort of overtly criminal, I guess, to my layman's eyes when I read this story. But is this as damning of evidence as the Georgia call, as Ken views it?
Yeah, let me give you an example. It's easy to think of this as a Michigan matter and then a Georgia matter and think of them separately. But what I think about is the possibility that the government might look at this as what we call 404B evidence. It's an exception to the rule that you can't ordinarily introduce evidence about a defendant, a criminal defendant, and say, hey, look, he's guilty because, look, he did something else bad over here. That's usually evidence that doesn't come in, but there's an exception. And I have to tell you, as a criminal defense attorney, the government, federal prosecutors, are really good at getting evidence in under this exception. And they may want to use this evidence to show what is the absence of a mistake. In other words, this might have been Trump's modus operandi or any of the other exceptions to this rule. So really, you can think of this about, well, does he have liability in the state of Michigan? But this might be evidence, and if it exists in other states, that could come in as what we call 404B, but really it's just evidence of, say, a modus operandi or the argument against that he was just accidentally doing this or that it was just a flub of the words in Georgia. This evidence could come in the other cases.
All right, Ken Delanian and Danny Savalos, thank you both for getting us started. When we lose Danny's signal, that's how we know we got to wrap it up. And up next, after days of negotiations, a major vote at the United Nations aiming to get desperately needed aid to Gaza, as we're learning more about an American Israeli hostage who's dying. And later, the latest actions from the Biden administration to try to address the crisis on the southern border as thousands more people cross into the U.S. every day. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the mounting pressure to get desperately needed aid to civilians displaced by the conflict and mounting pressure for a temporary pause in fighting. Earlier today, following days of intense negotiations, the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for urgent and extended humanitarian pauses and corridors throughout the Gaza Strip. The resolution passed 13-0. And despite its active role in shaping the resolution, the U.S. abstained from the vote. Here's U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, after the resolution passed, applauding its humanitarian goals, but explaining why the U.S. couldn't vote for it.
It took many days and many long nights of negotiating to get this right. But today, this council provided a glimmer of hope amongst a sea of unimaginable suffering. Ultimately, while we are encouraged that the council spoke out on this humanitarian crisis, we're deeply disappointed, appalled actually, that once again, the council was not able to condemn Hamas's horrific terrorist attack on October 7th. And I can't understand why some council members are standing in the way and why they refuse to condemn these evils unequivocally.
This comes as cameras were allowed inside the Kerem Shalom border crossing today, showing aid trucks moving into Gaza. In a press conference, Israeli forces defended their handling of the border, even going so far as to claim that there is no food shortage in Gaza.
Since October 21st, over 5,400 trucks carrying food, water, medical supplies, and shelter equipment have entered the Gaza. Through coordination between Israel, the US, Egypt, and the UN. The humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip also includes equipment for humanitarian zone in El Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis.
Humanitarian groups, including officials you have seen us interview on this program, have repeatedly said that the current flow of aid is nowhere near what is needed, that the entire Gaza population is facing a hunger crisis, and more than 500,000 people are facing starvation, according to the UN. Meanwhile, hostage negotiations remain stalled, with Hamas saying it won't come to the table at all unless Israel halts its military operations. This comes as the family of an Israeli-American hostage confirmed that 73-year-old Gad Haggai is dead after being critically injured in the October 7th attack. His wife remains in Hamas captivity. NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Lederman joins me now from Tel Aviv, and also with us is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, who has exclusive new reporting about the White House efforts to get more aid into Gaza. So, Josh, I'll start with you. What do you make of this discrepancy between the aid Israel claims is going into Gaza and what international groups like the UN are reporting?
Well, look, Garrett, there's a kinetic war going on, and there's an information war. This is part of that information war. And the numbers of how many trucks have gone through the Rafah border crossing, through Kerem Shalom on any given day have changed. And so depending on how you crunch the numbers and which time frame you look at, you can make a case kind of going either way. And both sides here clearly have a vested interest in trying to portray their version of events. But one thing that is very clear is the amount of aid that is going into Gaza is still far less than what was going in before this war started, which aid groups say was needed to really sustain life there.
And we had eyes and cameras at Kerem Shalom today. What did we see?
Yeah, well, we saw a massive operation that is now underway in a facility that is really geared for this exact type of thing. There are massive inspection machines, really state-of-the-art equipment that is able to screen huge amounts of goods in a very short amount of time to the level of inspection that Israel feels comfortable with. These are the same machines that they were using to inspect goods going into Gaza before this war started. And the Israelis clearly wanting to show off the fact that they are now making use of those capabilities as they try to address the global concerns that simply there is not enough life-saving aid making it into Gaza.
When we talk about the information war, the IDF showed some video yesterday claiming to show an explosion exposing what appears to be a network of tunnels. You're seeing the video now. What do we know about that video?
Yeah, so the IDF says that this was a network of tunnels used by senior Hamas officials that essentially connected in various points to the offices, to the homes of the top Hamas leaders that are in the Gaza Strip, allowing them to get quickly into very, very deep underground networks of tunnels, some of which are believed to still be housing some of those senior Hamas leaders. The IDF says that they essentially blew up that entire top network network that was connecting those offices and homes of those Hamas leaders, but NBC News cannot independently confirm exactly what took place in that explosion, Garrett.
And Josh, I feel like every day we've come on and there's been talks about talks for another ceasefire. Is there any movement worth reporting at all there?
Movement, not really. Both Israeli and American officials have remained slightly optimistic that at least the fact that talks are still ongoing in Egypt. There's been some hope that Islamic Jihad, another group that is also holding hostages, might join those talks in Cairo. But for now, Hamas is still saying they do not expect to release any additional hostages until there is a complete ceasefire. And that, of course, is a condition that Israel is not going to be willing to accept.
All right, Josh Lederman, thank you for that reporting from a stormy Tel Aviv. I want to turn to Monica now. So, Monica, we heard from the UN ambassador about this Security Council vote today. What's the White House saying about it? I'm fascinated by all the behind the scenes here just to get to a point where we could not vote.
Exactly, Garrett. It was days of delays to get to a point to basically ensure that the U.S. wouldn't have to veto the resolution, in effect blocking it. And so this is the plan that was set forth by the administration. It's one that I'm told the president, the Secretary of State, they were all on board with this. And even Secretary Blinken played a key role in refining the language. And he was on the phone with his counterparts these last couple of days, really trying to get it to a point where the draft language that was going to essentially amount to a ceasefire, to call for a cessation of the hostilities, is not something the United States would ever agree to. So instead, they really put in this fine print that says it would get to the point where the conditions for a potential stop in the fighting could be reached. But the other big component to this is that flow of humanitarian aid. What they're essentially now saying with the passing of this resolution is that there can ideally be a little bit more international coordination to try to see and step up what can get into Gaza, but then also just to continue to really do a little bit more of the actual inspection and getting the logistics that have been really challenging and have been a bit of a bottleneck, trying to address some of that with somebody who can coordinate that a little bit better, because they all agree what's going in now is helping a little bit, but it's nowhere near enough. Garrett.
This Axios reporting today caught our eye, with Senators Joni Ernst and Jackie Rosen, bipartisan pair, urging President Biden to try to put additional pressure on Qatar to bring Hamas back to the negotiating table. Qatar's role in all of this has been fascinating. What do we know about the White House response to that, and to the degree there is any such effort going on behind the scenes?
We do know that the talks to kind of get to the real talks are still going. So there's a little bit of progress and traction in that respect, and that is something that the U.S. has been a part of now for weeks, and they don't ever want to get ahead of a possible agreement because they do want to let the mediators like Qatar really lead that process and be the ones to announce anything. But just this week, Garrett, we saw this other deal with Venezuela to get some detained Americans freed. Who was that mediated by, in part? Qatar. So they have played this very large role in terms of the foreign policy and geopolitical implications here, and that is one the U.S. is still really talking to them daily about what they can continue to push for. And we did see, of course, in the last couple of days and weeks, some top U.S. officials like CIA Director Burns returning to the table to try to facilitate some of those talks. But I'm told in all my conversations, this really needs to get to a place where whatever Israel is putting on the table could be accepted by Hamas. And as you just heard Josh say there, that doesn't seem to be at all something that's going to happen in the immediate, but they're going to continue to push for it day in and day out. And some of the hostage families are worried and nervous that the holidays mean it's just not going to get enough attention. So they're continuing to really push for that in an intense way. And I'm told by officials here that they will still be trying to do this around the clock, Garrett.
Understandable. We just lost another hostage. What do we know about this Israeli-American hostage reportedly killed? The conditions under which are not entirely clear in Gaza.
Yeah, there's still a lot that we don't know, but tragically, his family did release a statement. This is a 73-year-old man, an Israeli-American dual citizen who was in Hamas captivity. His wife is still believed to be held, and this is really a situation, Garrett, where the U.S. knows that there were maybe 8 or 9 unaccounted for Americans believed to be held in Gaza. But what they continue to say is that there was just so little information that was known about their condition. They knew that some potentially were injured, some have health issues, and that is why, of course, time is of the essence here. And now they're going to continue to try to find out more information about some of these other potential Americans. But it's something, of course, that everybody is sending their extreme condolences to, and that the families wanted to, of course, remember him, his character, and who he was, and to highlight that in the face of this terrible news. And it's really something that I'm told here really officials are bracing for the possibility that that could be true of more hostages, because it's just there's such little visibility into their condition right now. Garrett.
Makes sense. Monica, Alba, thank you for being across all of those storylines for us. And it's now clear that we'll be entering the new year with not one but two hot wars raging in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and that the Biden administration will be working to support two key allies. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel reports on the world at war.
Ukraine's military this year faced a harsh reality check. Russia fortified its grip on eastern Ukraine and is refusing to let it go. With some of the fiercest fighting taking place in the city of Bakhmut.
Russian forces have now surrounded Bakhmut on three sides, and this is the only remaining route in and out of the city that Ukrainian forces can use.
Civilians who remained were driven into underground bunkers without power or heat. Ukraine threw everything it could at Russia in a long-anticipated counteroffensive. The United States backing President Zelensky with weapons and money. Vladimir Putin turning to mercenaries from the Wagner Group, led by his one-time caterer. The mercenaries fought or were shot. And the caterer turned commando, Yevgeny Prigozhin, grew so powerful that he turned against the Kremlin and marched on Moscow before having second thoughts. He died when his plane exploded in midair. U.S. officials believe Putin had him killed. And the war continued, with Ukraine and Russia firing so much artillery, both sides nearly ran out. Zelensky pleading to Washington for more. Putin turning to North Korea's Kim Jong-un. But so far, Ukraine's counteroffensive has accomplished little more than a stalemate. Political support in the United States is now in question.
Several Republican presidential candidates are expressing concerns about support for Ukraine.
Що я можу сказати? А готовий сенатор чи той чи інший кандидат, які вважають, що це дороговартісно для Сполучених Штатів підтримувати Україну, вони готові піти на війну, воювати, відправити своїх дітей, вони готові загинути.
And then Israel had its 9/11. On October 7th, Hamas-led militants stormed Israel from Gaza, killing more than 1,200 people, most of them civilians, and taking 240 hostages, including many women and children. The militants rained fire into Israel.
Stay down, stay down.
Israel responded with a ferocious military assault on the Gaza Strip to root out Hamas for good, flattening entire neighborhoods. President Biden has insisted that the U.S. can and must support two allies at once.
We cannot and will not let terrorists like Hamas and tyrants like Putin win.
The war in Israel brought to the surface long-held pain and anger, with massive pro-Palestinian protests calling for a ceasefire, and pro-Israel demonstrators raising their voices against rising anti-Semitism.
Bring them home.
A week-long ceasefire between Israel and Hamas brought a brief moment of calm and saw more than 100 hostages freed in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. But negotiations collapsed, each side blaming the other. More than 20,000 people have died in Gaza so far, about 70% of them women and children, according to the health ministry run by Hamas. Aid agencies say the 2.3 million people in Gaza are suffering a humanitarian collapse as pressure is mounting on Israel to bring the war to an end. But there's no agreement on who will run Gaza if or when Hamas is defeated. Richard Engel, NBC News.
Richard Engel reporting there. Up next, the Biden administration today calling on House Republicans to drop their impeachment inquiry, just as new NBC reporting shows that some Republicans may try to draw out the process for as long as possible. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we look ahead to the new year, the impeachment inquiry is surely going to be a major storyline. Now, despite holding a vote to formalize the inquiry last week, House Republicans have yet to demonstrate much progress on their investigation, or really even a timeline for their investigation. Some Republicans want a speedy inquiry, while others argue that they don't have any hard evidence yet. Ohio Republican Congressman Dave Joyce told us, quote, "I haven't seen any yet to date that shows me that the president did anything wrong. We've gone through the process of indicting President Biden and the members of the Biden family, but we've not seen yet any evidence that gives weight to the impeachment." We'll see where things go once Congress comes back in January and whether Republicans try to move quickly because it's an election year or whether they try to draw out the proceedings for as long as possible because it's an election year. As for the White House, their position on this is clear. A spokesperson put out a statement today that read, "It's time for Republicans to drop this political stunt and focus on the issues that actually matter to the American people." Joining me now on set is Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Svante Myrick, former Democratic mayor of Ithaca, New York, and president of People for the American Way, and Rick Tyler, Republican strategist and an NBC News political analyst. So, Susan, I want to play for you something Don Bacon told us on this show yesterday about the impeachment inquiry.
If this is perceived as being a revenge impeachment or a politicized impeachment, and as you say, all impeachments have political aspects to it, but if it's seen as being as a political weapon, it will hurt the Republicans. If we don't handle this right, and if it looks like we're using it as a political weapon, we'll come back to bite us. So,
yesterday, that's not the point. The point here is, do you think that is Don Bacon's timeline wrong? Has this already become irrevocably politicized? Not a single Democrat voted to start this process. What say you?
Well, and also, of course, they went ahead to approve this impeachment inquiry without actually having any evidence of wrongdoing, which seems backwards to at least Democrats. So, yeah, the history of impeachment does not it has not served well those who do the impeaching, Clinton being the best example of that.
To that end, Rick Tyler, what do you make of the theory here that it might be better for Republicans to never have a vote on impeachment, to just leave this as kind of an open-ended thing hanging out there, more like the Benghazi hearings than like an impeachment with a teleological end to it?
Well, I'll go back to your point that we're irretrievably attached to it. And I really think that people get tired of using government like serious. There is a process to remove a president, and it's called impeachment, and it should be for serious matters. But I think it's more than just a political stunt. I actually think it's dangerous because you do not want to live in a world where, I think Garrett robbed the grocery store. Well, I don't have any evidence that he robbed the grocery store, but we should arrest him because, after all, I think they might, and then we'll go about trying to prove. We don't want to live in a world like that. And if there is evidence, then go ahead and bring the evidence and then let the chips fall where they may. But if there is no evidence, it is going to be seen as a political stunt, and I think people are going to get really tired of that kind.
We may talk about grocery prices later in this segment, ironically. But Svante, what do you make of this? I mean, Bacon says he doesn't want this to be a revenge impeachment. But to Rick's point, I mean, how do you break this cycle of, kind of tit for tat? You guys went after my guy, so we're going to go after your guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you do it is by electing more reasonable and responsible people. Those are two words that are not...
What's your second best idea?
Not currently, failing that in the House GOP caucus. I think they just need to see the consequences of their actions at the ballot box. And I think that they will. I mean, look, President Biden won in 2020 in large part because he seemed delightfully, wonderfully, refreshingly boring. Seemed responsible and boring and dull in a way that after 4 years of chaos, we really embraced as a nation. And Hunter Biden was then who he is now, a troubled young man with serious addiction problems. The entire country knew about it then and still voted for Joe Biden because they knew that the biggest crime Joe had done was to be a loving and caring and supportive father. Now, this is not going to work to the Republicans' favor. I think most of them know it. I think certainly the Senate Republicans know it, and they're trying to urge caution. But the problem is that in the midterm elections in 2022, and in, frankly, every cycle of elections since at least 2010, the Republican House caucus has gone further and further away from the mainstream. And without reasonable people in that caucus, they will continue to damage themselves and their own political futures.
They may find that to be the case. And while we'd all like to believe 40 is still young, Hunter Biden was in his 40s when all this was going on. He wasn't a college student or anything, but your point is well taken.
Young here being respective
relative
to the president and former president's ages. Yeah.
Well, so the idea of a president who you could ignore, like sort of part of the Biden strategy in 2020, but in 2024, he needs something else. And I want to ask you about something my colleague Sahil Kapoor wrote. He talked to Florida Democrat Maxwell Frost, a couple of younger Democrats, about what the president needs to do, the idea that he needs an actual agenda. Frost told Sahil, well, we have to talk about what are our plans for 2025, 2026 and beyond, and how does that fit into this future we're fighting for? I think that's really the key right now among young progressive voters. If you asked the Biden campaign what their goals are for the second term, what would they say?
Yeah. And, you know, this is in contrast to former President Trump, who's been pretty clear on what he would do.
He's put out a ton of policy, actually.
And he's talked about his first priorities and being a dictator the first day and what he would do then. So Trump has been very clear on what his agenda is. Biden has not, other than saying he'd like to continue some of the policies he's pursued this first term. I think this is a problem for them. I think it's part of the act of energizing your supporters is telling them what you actually want to do if they give you their vote.
Rick, I thought Donald Trump was the ultimate turnout machine for both parties.
I think he probably still is.
Yeah?
But there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, I don't feel like I have to defend the Biden administration, but you know, the world is thus, right? Biden didn't create the problem in Ukraine. He didn't create the problem in Israel, and he's dealing with those things, and those are the focus. And the fact is, with no offense to my colleague, a lot of what the progressive left wants to pursue, the American people do not, and Biden is smart enough to know that, which is why he doesn't take on those issues in full-throatedness that they would like him to do. But you know, what's the answer is to what? Elect Donald Trump? I'm not sure they're going to see it that way.
Sure, but to that end, Svante, I mean, can the Biden campaign, can you make the case for Joe Biden in 2024 without saying Donald Trump?
Yeah. No. Yeah, you can.
Is it really that
can.
simple? Yeah.
Well, you can, but also the good news is that you don't have to, right? Donald Trump will be the opponent. And I actually think the sooner that happens, the better. Congressman Frost is absolutely right. The Democratic Party and President Biden have to put a proactive agenda out there. And they have to do it as soon as it becomes clear, and hopefully it's becoming clear to the entire nation that an investigation is not going to stop the Trump train. An indictment's not going to stop the Trump train. He is not going to be removed from the ballots. And so the only folks, if you want to stop Trump from becoming president again, you have to get engaged and involved as a citizen and as a voter. And that means making a choice between the two folks who will be on the ballot. And it is becoming increasingly clear. Those two people will be Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Yeah, you know one problem? Not two folks on the ballot. There are going to be like 5 folks on the ballot who are serious candidates, names people are going to know, alternatives they can vote for if they aren't so enthusiastic about either Trump or Biden.
Yeah, Rick, what do you make of that? I mean, when we talk about the idea that it's gonna be Trump, there is still there's one possible X factor that hasn't happened yet, and that's a conviction. And as our lead story indicated, that seems less likely now than it did 4 hours ago. But what does a conviction do to this Republican primary that your colleague is so sure is over?
We don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what the conviction will mean. I, by the way, don't think that Jack Smith suffered a defeat today.
No?
In fact, no, because the Supreme Court could have said, in fact, no, you don't have the right to convict a president while he's executing presidential duties. That had been decided by a different court. They didn't overrule that. And there's an expedited process for the lower court to deal with it. So I think we will get some movement or some clarity on Mr. Trump's future. What I don't understand is when you look at the January 6th insurrection, I don't know what else to call it, and the thousands of arrests, the convictions, the people who are in jail, the phone calls, the obstruction of justice, Rudy Giuliani, and the libel case, you have Trump lawyers who are now pleading guilty, and all this is going on, and Trump somehow he's Mr. Innocent, like he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything wrong. Yet they weren't here for anybody else. They weren't here right across the street for anybody else except for Mr. Trump because he called them here. And so something should move, and something should move fairly quickly. I understand that the wheels of justice grind slowly, but it hadn't for the people sitting in jail right now.
What do you make of the fact that the sort of general rules of electability on Trump have just not applied here at all, given everything? I mean, Rick Tyler, in our Republican seat here tonight, is telling us that, you know, exactly what he thinks about this, but there's been no political gravity for Trump in this primary.
Yeah, I have many thoughts, and actually,
Give me one, because we're basically out of time.
Since 2015, I have said to myself hundreds of times, surely this must be it. Surely, 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 he could not survive the scandal. And yet he survives and thrives because he's protected by an enormous media ecosystem, his own cult of personality, and his own celebrity, enormous celebrity, that he carried into his political career. The only people that have ever turned him back are those 70 million plus people who turned out to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. That's the only thing that will stop him in the future. Scandals won't do it. Indictments won't do it. We're going to have to do it.
A refreshingly honest pre-Christmas panel here today. Susan, Rick, and Svante, thank you all for coming on. And up next, border facilities stretched way beyond capacity, and border officials are beyond overwhelmed. We'll talk to a Texas mayor about what he wants to see happen in the Lone Star State. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to the latest in the emergency at the southern border. The White House announced that Secretary of State Blinken and Homeland Security Chief Mayorkas are being dispatched to Mexico in the coming days to meet with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, specifically to try to curb the flow of migrants to the U.S. on the U.S.-Mexico border. It comes as DHS has recorded a record-breaking 47,000 encounters with undocumented migrants at the border just between Monday and Thursday of this week. The trip comes after President Biden spoke with López Obrador by phone yesterday. The White House said that both leaders agreed that more needs to be done to address the border. Secretary Mayorkas had also been present at border negotiations back in Washington earlier this week as Senate lawmakers try to find some kind of way forward on a national security supplemental that hinges now on a border security deal. I'm joined now by the mayor of Houston, Texas, Sylvester Turner. Mayor Turner, thank you for being with us. I thought about you as we started to watch these numbers pick up this week. We hear about border facilities being over capacity, not all that far from Houston, Texas. What kind of impact does the city of Houston feel when the numbers spike at the border?
Well, I think we're all impacted, whether you're a city in the state of Texas, or quite frankly, whether you're cities in other parts, whether you're in New York, Denver, Chicago, D.C., L.A. I talk to mayors all the time across this country, and I think we all face the impact. There's no question we have a clear immigration problem, and we do need Congress to enact legislation in a comprehensive way to address a problem that clearly exists. So there's no question about that.
We've heard from some of those other mayors about the cutbacks and things like that that they've had to make in New York or Chicago, the way that this crisis has affected their budgets. What's the effect been like in Houston over this last year?
Well, in Houston, the problem has not been as acute as what I'm hearing. And
what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think what's happening in the state of Texas, for example, is that the state, the governor, is sending people by buses or planes, sending them to other cities outside of the state of Texas. So I think what you will find, if you're not one of those border cities, like El Paso, if you're not one of those border cities where people are coming over, the impact for other Texas cities further away is not as acute. But when you have...
What do you make of that, Mayor? Should those folks be staying in Texas? Is that the governor shifting what could be Texas's responsibility or opportunity as a welcoming state onto other places?
Well, I think the bottom line is that we need a comprehensive immigration reform. Whether you're a Texas city or city someplace else outside of Texas, it is clear we have a problem, well, an immigration problem. And it is clear that we need comprehensive immigration reform. We've heard that over and over and over again. And we need Congress to act. This is a federal issue. And the problem has to be addressed at the federal level. You can't have different states in the union having their own immigration and enforcement policies. That doesn't solve it. It makes things even worse. So this is an issue. This is an issue begging for congressional action.
To that end, what do you make of the policies just signed into law by your governor this week about, essentially allowing Texas law enforcement to go arrest people who've crossed illegally? What kind of strain does that put on the HPD and on your own law enforcement officials there?
Now, I will say, as it relates to Senate Bill 4, that will place a severe strain on local authorities and on local resources. Number one, what has been put in place essentially says if someone crosses illegally, that any law enforcement entity in the state of Texas has to step in and become, quote unquote, an immigration officer. That is a mandate being placed on cities that's unfunded. The state didn't provide any funding for that. It diverts human and financial resources from cities like Houston, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso. There are no dollars for that. It puts the mandate on local cities to house these individuals until there's some sort of resolution. There's no funding for that.
Well,
it even causes for the further separation of children from their parents. So there are multiple problems inherent in Senate Bill 4, and then fundamentally, I believe it's unconstitutional.
You are part of a group of mayors who asked the White House, I think, for $5 billion to help address this. Some of your colleagues who were part of that group did ultimately meet with the Biden White House. What kind of information did they get? Are you satisfied with the urgency with which the Biden administration is approaching this issue?
Well, there's no question that more resources are needed. Cities need these dollars. You can't keep adding burdens on top of existing issues that we're having to face without the necessary resources coming on board. So there's no question about that. We do need more federal dollars. But at the same time, we don't need individual states to be engaged in immigration policy. That's the domain of the federal government. We do need Congress, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, in this case, to step up and come forward with comprehensive immigration reform. Until that happens, we're going to have these sort of issues. So I'm not placing the blame, for example, on the Biden-Harris administration. Quite frankly, there's enough blame to go around to everyone. What we do need in this particular area is that we do need Congress to act, the House, the Senate, and we do need people to be on the same page to address a problem that's impacting all of us, cities, states, across the board.
Houston Mayor Sly Turner wrapping up a second and final term in the job. Thank you for making time for us this week.
Thank you.
Up next, 'tis the season for presidential pardons, and this year, President Biden's pardon proclamation could affect a whole lot of people. We'll get into the weeds, so to speak, next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Some Americans got a surprise holiday gift from the White House today as President Biden issued a pardon for certain marijuana offenses. The move covers Americans who were committed or were convicted of simple possession, attempted possession, or use of the drug in Washington, D.C., or on certain federal lands. In addition to this blanket pardon, President Biden also granted clemency to 11 people serving disproportionately long sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist is back with more on this move by the Biden administration. So, Aaron, just how big of a deal is it that thousands of people with marijuana charges are now eligible for pardons? How does this kind of fit in with the normal scope of the yearly pardons and clemency?
Yeah, this could be significant, Garrett. Thousands of people potentially facing pardon under this proclamation from President Biden today. In particular, we're talking about people who have convictions for use or simple possession or attempted simple possession of marijuana, particularly on federal land and in the District of Columbia. This is something that really expands on pardons that the president had already issued around simple possession of marijuana and really fits in with what he has described as trying to move toward more equal justice as it relates to this particular drug. It relates to marijuana. And so for people who are subject to this pardon, they'll be able to have this completely removed from their records, and it would have an impact potentially on things like jobs or housing or education.
Should we look at this as a one-off, or does this tell us something about the administration's approach to drug policy?
This is something that the president has been signaling and making steps toward changing for some time now. We know that earlier this year, the Health and Human Services Department issued a recommendation to the Drug Enforcement Agency that it changed the scheduling of marijuana from a Schedule I drug like heroin or LSD to a Schedule III drug that would be something that would face a lesser penalty if people were convicted of some sort of a crime, or even decriminalize it in a way that's different from where it is right now. The DEA has said that it is reviewing that recommendation from the HHS, and we could see that be something that would have a significant impact in drug policy in this country for generations to come, Garrett.
Aaron Gilchrist, thank you for that reporting. And that does it for us for today. We'll be back next week with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, a special edition of Meet the Press featuring Kristen's conversations with influential voices outside of Washington who are speaking out on issues impacting the nation's politics. NBC News Now coverage continues with Christine Romans in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.